Hello everyone. Let's do some practice questions for CompTIA Security Plus and LPI Security Essentials. Put together some practice questions for you guys to check out. We're going to have a look at the questions, go through the options, and reason our way to the correct answer. Now before we get started properly though, I just want to do a disclaimer. This channel, Darkbird Tech, is not affiliated with CompTIA, LPI, or any of their partners. The following questions are meant to give you practice for preparing for the exam. They are not actual exam questions and answers. I want to repeat that. They are not the questions you'll get in the exam. All these questions have been created to provide a similar experience for the exam and how the knowledge will be tested. Any similarities is because this was the goal. But by no intent are these actual exam questions. That being said, let's talk about our workflow for this video. So the way we're going to work through these questions. The questions will pop up on the screen first. We will have a look at the question. I'll give you an opportunity to pause the video so you can consider the question and think about what options you would like to see. Then the options can appear, obviously assuming you choose to pause. Then we will look at the options. I'll give you an opportunity to pause the video again. And then we'll work out the answer. And once we've done that, we take a sip of coffee. And then we move on to the next one. All right, so without much further ado, let's get into the first question. Which of the following is not considered a software vulnerability? I'll give you a chance to pause, let you think about what you want to see, but remember we're looking for something that is not software. Let's check the options. So, option A, XML injections. Option B, remote code execution. Option C, outdated firmware. Option D, cross-site request forgeries. Chance for you to pause. All right, so let's work it through. XML is used in a lot of data files, and data files are used by software applications. So I'm going to say no, because we're looking for something that is not a software vulnerability. Okay. Remote code execution. Code execution sounds software to me. Outdated firmware. A bit tricky because technically firmware is a type of software encoded into hardware, but it is hardware. So that's on the table still. Cross-site request forgery. That's a bit of social engineering taking advantage of cookies. So cookies, networking, data files, protocols, it's all software. So yeah, it's a no. So that leaves us with outdated firmware as the option. Cool. Process of elimination works well. Moving along. So an organization wants to build a new backup data center with a rapid failover as possible. Which of the following types of sites is best for this scenario? I'll give you a chance to pause and think about what you'd like to see. So we've got cold site, warm site, cloud site, hot site. Okay, let's see. So let's process elimination this. Cold site, it is slow. End of story. They didn't speak about cost share at all. They're caring about how fast it is. So because cold sites are slow, I want to take that out of the conversation. All right. A warm site could work pretty well. Let's see. But they did ask for a data center with as rapid a failover as possible. Warm sites are faster than cold sites, but too variable and not the fastest. So that leaves us with cloud sites and hot sites. Now, a cloud site could fail over pretty quickly, but it depends on how it's deployed. So there's too many question marks here for my liking on how this will go. So I'm going to put a single line through that. Hot site, I'm digging a hot site because it's a secondary data center that you can control. And if you do it right, the instantaneous failover is quite doable. Very, very possible. So I'm liking the hot site option more. Cloud site could be a viable option, but again, like I said, it could depend. Because you could always pause or shut down those cloud instances when you're not using them. And it takes time for things to start up, even if they are running in the cloud. Whereas the hot site, by definition, stuff has to be running, data has to be synchronized. So I'm definitely favoring the hot site here. I'm happy with that answer. Let's move along. During an investigation, An incident response team is attempting to limit an attack spread and the attack from escalating. Which phase of incident response is the team currently in? Okay, so this is where we have to now remember our incident response process that CompTIA uses in general. All right, so I'm going to give you a chance just to think about what you'd like to see here. So containment, detection, lessons learned, preparation. Okay, so let's see, what are they doing? They're attempting to limit the attack from spreading and from escalating. I'm liking containment because containment is where you are trying to stop the attack from getting worse. So this is feeling pretty good. But let's look at the other options just in case, and this is something you want to get into the habit of. If you like the option A in the exam, take your time, look at the other options. You might like the other options a bit more. Don't let your first preference be too biasing towards you. So option B is detection. Now the thing is, detection is literally what it is, detecting the attack. So no, I wouldn't say we're trying to limit the attack from spreading. That's not what detection is all about. Detection is about, oh, something's happening. We better get on that now. Lessons learnt, although I do believe that is a very valuable phase. You're not limiting the attack. You should have resolved the attack. It should be done by now, and you're trying to learn from your experiences. So B and C I'm not very comfortable with. Preparation, you could argue that in preparing for incident response, you should be trying to do as much preventative stuff as possible. And preventative security controls would limit the attack, would stop it from escalating. But wait, during an investigation, yeah, no, I'm still favoring option A. I'm not so mad about the preparation. I'm arguing too much. Do not argue too much for some of these options. Not a good idea. All right, let's move along. Next up, we've got this one. During a security incident, the security team identified continuous network traffic from a malicious IP address of 155.99.5.52. Apologies if that is your IP address. Which of the following rules could prevent this IP from accessing the network? So it looks like we're expecting to see some ACLs or firewall rules here. Now, with this type of thing, don't panic, because even if you haven't seen the syntax that CompTIA or LPI uses, CompTIA will probably do this more than LPI, but still, you can sit and read that technicality and think about what it looks like and figure out what it's going to do for us. So let's see what the options are. So we've got a lot of syntax that's very similar, so let's use that to our advantage. So they're all beginning with ACL rule. Okay, that seems fine. It also tells me it's an access control list. ACL, access control list, not bad. It doesn't mean that it's not on a firewall, because most firewalls that I am aware of can have basic ACLs in addition to their ordinary firewall rules. Anyway, all of them seem to be inbound rules, which makes sense because that is a public IP address that we're seeing here. So it would be somebody on the internet coming in and attacking us. That makes sense. Next thing is we've got deny, deny, permit, permit. Now hang on, we're trying to prevent this. So because those two there say permit, I'm not happy with them, so I'm going to take them out for now. Then it's IP source. Okay, so we're picking on a source IP address. Again, that makes sense because we were trying to stop this IP address from accessing us. And we want to stop them coming from that address. So because of that, I'm starting to feel very good about option B, but let's look at the rest of it still. Destination 0.0.0.0/0. So I'm hoping you're familiar with your Network Plus stuff, because that is normally how we say an undefined destination, which means that we're trying to say here with this second rule, deny IP source coming from 155.995.52 going to any of our addresses. That rule seems good. The other rule, A, I'm not mad about, because it's saying deny anything from an undefined address going to the attacker. The attacker shouldn't be in our network, so I'm not so mad about that. B seems to be the best fit here. Cool, I'm happy with that. Let's move along. All right, question number 5. An IT security admin needs a solution that adds an extra layer of security when accessing internal company resources externally. Okay, so they want to have more protection when people are coming in remotely by the sounds of things. Okay, cool. Which of the following would work best? So, first option, a hypervisor. Second option, a proxy server. Third option, a VPN gateway. And the fourth option, option D, an RDP server. Okay, now all four of these can work because technically you could use a VM to act as a jump box. That's an option. But I feel like I'm stretching there a bit. So I'm going to leave that one for now, but I'm not thrilled with it. A proxy server, I'm going to be a little bit pedantic here. The thing with the proxy server is normally that's for an internal user going out, and we normally use that to filter them. What would have worked better here would have been a reverse proxy, but they didn't specify reverse. So this is not a reverse proxy. Don't like that. A VPN gateway does sound good. I would like to assume that if they're looking at adding extra security to their external users accessing resources remotely, that they're already using a VPN. So that is a fairly logical assumption. I don't like making too many assumptions, and you should be careful about it, but it does feel like a good one. And then we've got an RDP server. And yes, that could be used as a jump box. But the thing is, the jump box itself does not guarantee any extra security. It's just adding an extra step. So unless we're like maybe only limiting remote access to a jump box, cool. But we're talking about any user. And I don't think any average user would be comfortable using RDP. So I'm definitely not mad about A. C and D I'm okay with. They feel good. But the thing is, D does require a level of technical knowledge and insight that your average user just simply might not possess. Whereas a VPN gateway, your users are probably familiar with using a VPN already, and the VPN gateway is going to automatically grab, redirect, and terminate a VPN tunnel in a part of the network where you want it to end. That seems good to me. So purely because C feels better, I'm going with that one. All right, move along. This one looks a bit long. Let's make sure we don't get ourselves twisted up and confused. A penetration tester is commissioned to perform an unknown environment test against an organization. We used to call them black box tests, but it's still the same thing regardless of the name used, where the pen tester knows as little about the environment as possible. They begin by reviewing the organization and its staff's online presence and other sources of open source intelligence or OSINT, which would make sense if you're starting out with zero knowledge about the target environment. What type of reconnaissance is the penetration tester performing? Okay, so let's think about what we might want to see here, and then let's have a look. We've got active, we've got passive, we've got offensive, and we've got defensive. Okay, but let's see. What type of recon is the penetration tester performing? Now, the last two options I want to quickly eliminate because I feel just when I was reading them that they don't make the most sense. Because the penetration tester is doing reconnaissance. So technically, yes, you could argue it is offensive. It's definitely not defensive because the pen tester is trying to break your security. So if you were to do recon like the pen tester, an internal staff member, you could argue it's defensive, but this is the pen tester. They're external. So I'm not happy with D. C, you could argue, but I'm going 50-50 there for now. Option A and B, let's talk about that one. Active and passive. So active reconnaissance would be when the attacker is engaging with your systems, doing port scans, querying services, pinging to see what IP addresses are active in a network or internet facing. You get the idea. They're busy engaging somehow with your systems and your services and possibly even your software and applications and data. That's active. Passive is where they're not engaging with your stuff. And one of the things you can use as a test in your mind is, would this recon exercise possibly trigger like an intrusion detection system or some other sort of alerting capability of ours? And the thing is, somebody looking at the organization's online presence, their staff's online activity, and other forms of open source intelligence, they're basically just surfing the net, looking for some information that's going to lead them possibly to know more about the organization. Like, for instance, if the organization is advertising a position for a particular database technology, like Windows SQL Server, that tells me using Microsoft SQL Server. So I'm feeling passive because looking at people on LinkedIn and looking at an organization's website, that's not going to trigger any alarm bells. I'm feeling passive. Active, I don't see that triggering alarm bells. And offensive, we don't really use that term to describe reconnaissance. So passive feels the best option there. Next up, a user receives a text message requesting that they update their work credentials after a security breach, with a shortened hyperlink in the message. I haven't even seen the hyperlink and I'm already feeling uncomfortable about that. I don't know about you, but that makes me a little bit new. Which of the following types of social engineering is being attempted here? Choose two. Okay, so this is a question where we've got to choose more than one option, which means we are probably going to see more than 4 or 5 options listed here. Let's see. I'm going to give you a chance to think about what you'd like to see. Pause if you have to. And let's see our options. We've got phishing, vishing, misinformation, typo squatting, impersonation, and smishing. Oof, quite a few options here now. So process of elimination and discussion. Let's do that. But if you want to pause and think about your choice, go for it. Otherwise, let's start breaking it down. So phishing is where we're throwing out the net, hoping we're going to catch somebody with some trickery and maliciousness. The question doesn't specify whether the SMS is very specific about the user. It's just saying after a security breach, you need to reset your password. Please click here. So I'm sort of feeling that. I'm sort of liking option A still. So let's see how that goes. Then we have vishing. Vishing is phishing, but through voice channels. I don't see any phone calls happening here. It said an SMS or a text message if we want to be pedantic here. So just because of the voice aspect, I'm going to eliminate option B straight away. Misinformation. Definitely. But the thing is, it's asking the user to click on a link. If this were a misinformation attack, it's just fake news to distract and confuse people. So I'm not too mad about that. Might be true, might not be true. But the fact it's asking for engagement means it's a little bit more than just trying to trick people and make them think things they shouldn't be thinking about. Typo squatting. Now, typo squatting is when the attackers register a very similar domain name to the victim organization, hoping that somebody makes a typo error or something like that, or doesn't look closely at the domain of an email. Now, if they were doing that, why would they have shortened the hyperlink? They'd have just let the typo squat do its thing. So I'm not overly thrilled with that option. Still on the table, but I'm not overly mad about it. Impersonation. Let's see, did they actually specify if somebody claiming to be like the security admin? Let's see. A user receives a text requesting that they update their work credentials after a security breach with a shortened hyperlink in the message. It doesn't say whether or not this message was like from Bob the admin or something like that. So I'm not too keen on impersonation, but you could argue maybe they're trying to impersonate the IT security department. But the thing is, they don't specify that. I could send out a SMS like that to any number, and I'm hoping that somebody at a workplace has had a recent security breach and they think, oh, I better click that. I'm hoping for that. So I might not be impersonating anyone specifically. I don't know, I don't see the message here. So I'm going to just put one line through, but I'm still not overly thrilled with it. Smishing, SMS phishing. Well, they don't specify whether this is like an SMS or a rich chat message or an iMessage or anything like that. So it's still a text message, and SMSs were our first kind of text messaging. So that's where the name comes from. So I am digging smishing for definite. Phishing felt good. Although you could argue the impersonation, but you're stretching a bit there. And the thing is, even if you think, well, there are still some good options here, don't stretch. If you've got two options that fit very well, don't think it's suspicious if they fit too well, or they seem too similar, like smishing and phishing. They do both sound very similar. If I have to stretch for the other options, I'd rather stick with what's straight away going to be a good fit. Sometimes it does pay to go with your gut. Moving along though, to our next question. A recent string of office break-ins have been occurring in the area. In each event, computer hard drives were removed and stolen. The hard drive specifically, that's interesting. What encryption should a security administrator use to lower the threat level of this risk? Let's have a look. Symmetric, asymmetric, full disk, and file level. I'm going to give you a chance to think about the options there. But we're asking what kind of encryption we should be using here. Now, I don't see how the key would make much difference here. Because here we're arguing about, does the one key encrypt and decrypt, or do we have one key that encrypts and a different key that decrypts? I don't feel like that's going to make much difference here. But let's look at the full disk and the file level as well. So full disk encryption will hit the whole hard drive, encrypt the entire disk, and probably require something to decrypt at boot time. And if it's something like, let's say, BitLocker from Microsoft, it could either use the TPM module to do the decryption or require us to type in a password. One of the two would be good here. File level encryption is also a good option here, because that's going to encrypt file by file. And usually file level encryption works either when you log in or when you've typed in something that decrypts and unlocks the file. So both feel pretty good to me. But you know what? If I'm worrying about the hard drives being stolen, the full disk encryption makes more sense because they're taking it out of the computer. And if we're using something like BitLocker and it doesn't see the TPM module, it ain't going to decrypt. So that's a pretty cool option. I like that. Whereas file level encryption, it's going to be present whether the drive's in the computer or not. But file level encryption is a bit easier to crack. So because it's a little bit easier to crack, I'm going to go for full disk encryption here. Assuming it's something like BitLocker or a self-encrypting drive or something equally good that can recognize that it is no longer in the same computer and remain locked up. I mean, don't get me wrong. Hard drives are not cheap. But at the same time, I can't imagine the black market for stolen hard drives is that lucrative. Because they're not that expensive either, depending on the kind of hard drive you're talking about here. So, which of the following threat actors are usually acting on behalf of a country's government? Attacking public and private sector organizations in other countries. I'm going to let you pause and think about it, but I already know what I'm feeling like seeing here. So option A, script kiddies, activists, organized criminals, and nation-state actors and state-sponsored hackers. If you are knee-jerking to option D right now, I'm glad. It means you paid attention in Module 2 of this series. But let's eliminate the other ones to make sure we're confident about our answer. So let's see. Script kiddies are doing it for shits and giggles, hoping to make a name for themselves and prove I can do it, but they're only using pre-built hacking tools while not fully understanding how the tool works and what they're actually doing. They just know if they do X, they get Y, and they can get access to Z. That's what they do. Hacktivists? It could be, but the thing is, a hacktivist would probably want to target a specific organization, and if they get funded and supported by another country's government, they wouldn't really care that much, but they wouldn't be interested in any other targets of interest for that foreign government. So, organized criminals, on the other hand, they might. So if we think about it, yeah, that would be my second best option here. Those two definitely not, though. Nation state is still my favorite answer here, because literally it is in the description. Nation state or state-sponsored hacking. But organized criminals, for the right price, they'll do anything. Their loyalty is to money. But as long as that country's government is paying them, they'll do it. So if it weren't for the nation state or state-sponsored hacker option there, I'd have probably gone for organized criminals. That's my second best. But because I got a better option, I'm going to go for that better option. Moving along though. Question 10. Which of the following involves processing data that will result in a non-reversible output? That bit sounds important. That will be unique to the data and consistently provide the same non-reversible output. I'm going to let you think about that. And now let's see what those options could be. Steganography, hashing, data masking, data anonymizing. I know which one I want to jump to straight away, but I'm going to give you a chance to think about it. Pause the video if you need to. Let's get into it. So let's pick out some keywords here. Non-reversible output, unique to the data, and consistently provide that non-reversible output. In other words, probably always the same. Steganography, it is reversible. So because it's reversible, that's out of the game. Hashing, ticking most of those boxes. Hashing is not meant to be reversible, and if we salt the hash values, definitely won't be reversible. Hashing is also going to give unique values. Even if I change one binary bit of a 1 gigabyte file, the hash value will be different on the output. And as long as I keep hashing the same data with the same function and the same salt algorithm, it should keep giving me the same. So I'm feeling hashing is right. Feeling is ticking all three things for me. All right, data masking. Data masking is just where we replace the value of data, that's all. And it's part of privacy and stuff like that. So I'm not really worried. No. It's going to have to be unmasked. And I don't think it necessarily would be unique. So I'm going to say no, because it's got to be reversed. It doesn't sound like it's going to have to be unique. So yeah, I'm not happy with that. Then data anonymizing. That's just taking away unique identifiers like someone's name or social security number or phone number or something like that. That doesn't feel like it'll be completely irreversible. So I'm going to take that out of the equation. Hashing is the correct answer. As soon as I saw non-reversible, consistent, and stuff like that, I was thinking hashing. If you were too, I'm proud of you. But if you had to do process elimination, I'm still proud of you because you're working the right way. Trust me, those of you that get the thing straight away, you'll have a question later that you're going to have to think about. Next up, a seam with alert rules configured and fine-tuned is an example of which type of control? I'll give you a chance to think about it. So the options are corrective, procedural, detective, preventative, and compensating. Chance for you to think. So, let's see. Seams are monitoring tools, and they're meant to alert us to an intrusion, possibly even a historical one. But still, it's going to let us better detect. Oops, I'll let the cat out the bag there. Although you probably felt detective was the right option already. But let's eliminate the others. Corrective controls are done after an incident has happened. So usually, incident occurs, incident response team does their thing. Lessons learned and good motivation for implementing a security control that will correct that in the future. That's not what a seam's really done for. Seams are way too much work for a corrective control. They'll be done as a proactive good approach to security. So I'm taking out corrective there. We already know it's detective because I let the cat out the bag early. Sorry. But let's do the other ones. Procedural, no. Procedural controls are how people do things. Policies, procedures, guidelines, and stuff like that. A seam is a technical control. So definitely not that. Detective, we know that, so that's cool. Preventative, a seam's not going to stop the attack. A firewall stops the attack. Changing bad default settings, that stops the attack. But not a seam. It's an alerting thing. You could argue that a seam does compensate. It does make up for when a preventative control fails. But strictly speaking, when we say compensating control, if I'm worried about firewall A failing, I can implement another firewall further into the network. That would be closer to what a compensating control really is. So even though that's kind of right, no, I'm not going for that. The compensating control is there to trick you, to try and make you think twice about choosing detective, but detective is the right option here. Next up, If an organization fails to comply with a legally required regulatory compliance obligation, what is the most likely outcome during a compliance audit? Ugh. I hate the legal things. I hate the legal things. I'm a technical person through and through, but that's me. So, I'll give you a chance to think about what you'd like to see here. Let's have a look. Reputational damage, fines, operational interruption, and revocation of an operating license. Now, the thing is, all of these are good. The issue is, it's going to depend on the compliance requirement, which is not specified. So we have to make our best guess here now. So let's try and eliminate things. So straight away, the revocation of an operating license, that feels a bit extreme for failing to meet a compliance obligation. Because a reasonable legal regulation would say, if you're not compliant, you've got this amount of time to fix it, or something like that. They're not going to take away your ability as an organization to operate. And in some countries, that's illegal to do. You can't stop an organization from operating, but you can definitely penalize them in other ways to encourage them aggressively to become compliant. So, now they could have to cease part of their operations during that period while they're sorting the compliance out. So that is a maybe. Fines? Yeah, I definitely think fines, pretty good chance of that. Very, very good chance of that. The reputational damage, however, I'd say that would probably be more of a consequence as opposed to a outcome or a penalty. Because any regulatory authority doing a compliance audit on you, their goal is not to embarrass the organization. Their goal is to get the organization to be compliant with whatever the legal regulation says. If it does become public knowledge, then yes, it will obviously damage their reputation. But that is not what the regulator would possibly be intending to do. So because that's not intentional by the regulator, I don't like that option. So that leaves us with B and C. And B, I feel there's a good chance of that happening, that you're going to get a fine. C, yes, it may happen, it may not. It depends a bit too much on details that we are not being provided here. So I'm going to go with B purely because it feels like the best fit. Although not necessarily straightforward and definitive, it does feel like the best fit. And you're going to get questions like this in the exam, where every option could be right in the correct circumstances, but you don't know all the details of the circumstances, and you don't want to sit there rationalizing every option. Because if you're doing that, you're going to sit there not knowing what to do. And if you catch yourself thinking, but all of these could be right, all of these are right given X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and all the other letters of the alphabet, flag the question for review and come back to it later. That's my best bit of advice for situations like this. These kind of questions, often what I do personally, is I leave this for the very end. So that I'm like, gut feels that's right. When it's a bit of an open to interpretation and lots of scenarios could be correct. That's normally how I like to tackle that. But moving along. A zero-day exploit has become public knowledge. An administrator has determined that the organization is at risk of the zero-day exploit. Oh dear. And has determined what configuration change would reduce the risk while the vendor works on releasing a patch. So obviously this is a software product that the organization is using. And in a situation like that, we have to wait for the vendor to fix the problem, assuming it's still being supported. So what steps should the administrator take first? I don't know, but they should probably take very quick steps. So first one, create an emergency change proposal, quarantine the affected system, apply the configuration change, or shut down the affected system. Okay, so yes, a zero-day exploit is a very, very extreme situation to be in, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to take a nuclear bomb to crack a walnut here. So let's eliminate some things that might be a bit too extreme. So shutting down the affected systems, that might have too significant an operational impact. I don't know. But it does seem a bit extreme to completely shut something down, impacting your ability to operate, because you basically just done what the attackers would do, impacting your ability to operate. So no, that doesn't make sense to me. Apply the configuration change? It seems a little bit too easy, doesn't it? Let's just leave it there for now. Quarantining the affected system. Now, quarantining isn't as bad as shutting it down, but it is isolating it. And that can, again, have a negative impact on service availability, operations, and stuff like that. So it does feel a bit too impactful a solution. And honestly, if you're going to start quarantining and shutting down every system with a vulnerability that could be exploited, suddenly you're going to have no computers, no servers, no anything. You're going to be back to pen and paper. So that leaves us with option A and C. Option A is to create an emergency change proposal. And the fact that they've mentioned an emergency change proposal makes me happy. Because normally when it comes to things like change control and change management and so forth, you should have an emergency change proposal process for something that needs to be done as quickly as possible while still adhering to the benefits and the good intentions of change management, which is to ensure that your alterations don't have undesired negative outcomes. So I do like A quite a lot. C does feel like it's going to reduce the risk quickly. But let's just have a look at the question. I don't see anything about the administrator wanting to reduce the risk as soon as possible. I just see that the administrator has determined what configuration change would reduce the risk while the vendor works on a patch. It doesn't say the administrator wants to do it right away. And applying a configuration change without any sort of approval or second thoughts does worry me a little bit. Especially because it's a security administrator probably. And this admin is worried about the security risk. But they're not thinking necessarily about whether that change they're going to do could have consequences that they're not thinking about right now. So I'm not too happy with C. I've been happy with A since right at the beginning. So I'm going to go with A. So question 14. Which of the following threat actors would be able to perform most of their attack before arousing suspicion or being detected by security monitoring? Ooh. Attackers that can get away with a lot before we even are onto them. That sounds scary. Give you a chance, though, to pause and think about what options you'd like to see. So options are APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat, nation-state actors / state-sponsored hackers, an insider, or a script kiddie. Okay, so script kiddies, they're not elegant. They just know how to use the tool. So they're out. APT and nation-state hackers, they're very, very similar. They're going to put a lot of time and a lot of effort into attacking you. But the thing is, if they make one misstep, if they don't realize I've got an IDS in this part of the network, for instance, or they don't realize they're engaging with a honeypot system, they're going to give me a heads up. They're going to allow me to detect them more easily. Whereas the insider, to me, I believe that person would be able to get away with an attack for far longer before anyone starts suspecting anything, because a malicious insider can do malicious things as long as it is within their job responsibilities, their privileges and authorization. As long as they are very sneaky, they can get away with a lot of damage before anyone's onto them. So I'm feeling the malicious insider. Don't get me wrong, both of these are very good threats. But the malicious insider, even if they're not technically skilled, can do a lot more damage. So I'm going to go with that one. So, 15th question. Which of the following is used to document risks? Responsible parties, asset information, and risk management actions that have been performed. So it's a documentation question. Yay. Okay, it shouldn't be like that. Documentation is good, it's valuable, it's just boring to do. So give you a chance to think about it, and let's have a look at the options. So first up, asset register. Then option B, change control proposal. Option C, a vulnerability report. And option D, a risk register. Now, I do like the asset register here. I'm a big believer in the value of an asset register in cybersecurity. But they do mention assets here, but they're also talking about risk management and the actions and responsible parties. That's a bit beyond the scope of the asset register. So because of that stuff, the asset register is not covering enough for my liking. A change control proposal, that would definitely speak to the actions that have been performed for risk management. But in terms of documenting the risk in general, yes, there would be risks in the change control, risks of doing the change, risk of not doing it. But I don't know. Doesn't feel right. There, but not there. So I'm going to leave it there for now. A vulnerability report. Vulnerability reporting and management is usually looking for vulnerabilities, detecting them, and reporting on them. That's the bare minimum for a vulnerability management cycle. Proper vulnerability management obviously would be you do something about the vulnerabilities and then test and report again. But you're not really focusing on the asset, you're focusing more on the vulnerability. And you're not blaming anybody, so you don't really care who's responsible for the thing, you just want to fix the vulnerability. So now I'm not too happy with the vulnerability report here. The risk register, yeah, that fits well. That's a good fit to me. So I'm going to take out the other one. The risk register is meant to document and deal with all of those things and maybe more depending on which risk management framework you are following. So it feels like a pretty good option to me. So let's move along. So which of the following would need to be reviewed by all parties before external penetration testers can begin the security assessment? Choose two. Okay, so we're going to have to keep our minds open for two options here. Which means there's going to be some very appealing options here. Oh dear. I'll give you a chance to think about what you'd like to see. Pause if you need to. Otherwise, here are the options. Rules of engagement, scope of work, right to audit, service level agreement, memorandum of understanding, or non-disclosure agreement. And I'm sorry, but you do not have an ask the audience or phone the friend. You have to figure this one out yourself, I'm afraid. So let's see. Rules of engagement. If I was a pen tester, I would definitely want rules of engagement agreed upon with the client. And if I was a halfway decent security practitioner, which I like to think I am, if I was hiring pen testers, I'd definitely like to discuss how they're going to attack and target my systems to test vulnerabilities and my security and so forth. Scope of work also feels pretty good. Pen testers that are smart will always make sure they've agreed these are the systems we'll target, nothing else. And there'll be no change of scope during the test either. So A and B are feeling really good to me. But let's carry on. A right to audit. That feels like something I would impose on a service provider, especially a cloud service provider, where they've got the intrinsic ability to obfuscate things from me because of virtualization and the confidentiality of their other clients and so forth. So it doesn't feel right for a pen tester. Service level agreement. Technically, yes, the pen testers are offering a service, but this is not a long continual service. This is a service delivery event. We know they're going to test us. So I don't think the service level agreement is the right thing here. Plus, I'm not really expecting to hold my pen testers to recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives and performance levels and availability targets. It doesn't feel right. This is more of something that a service provider would have with their customer receiving that service. Memorandum of understanding, that is definitely a security agreement, yes. But it's more for the businesses that are planning to work together on something in some capacity. Especially if they're going to partner, that's definitely going to be that. Whereas a pen tester, again, it's an event. It's not a long-term relationship necessarily. So, no. A non-disclosure agreement. That would be a very good idea. Even with pen testers, having a non-disclosure agreement with them, if they discover some intellectual property or trade secrets, that would definitely be something I'd like to agree with them. Make sure that they know, listen, if you talk about this to anybody, you're in a lot of trouble. That would definitely be a good type of agreement to have. So let's go back and look at the question again. Which would need to be reviewed before external pen testers can begin the security assessment? So if I was bringing in a pen tester and I decided, okay, yeah, you're going to do the stuff, I'd have probably got a non-disclosure agreement out of the way early on before discussing anything else. So we're at the point where we're about to start our security assessment. So I think this should have been done already. So I'm going to say no to the non-disclosure agreement. That leaves me with the scope of work and the rules of engagement, options A and B. Those feel like the best fit to me, which they should because I wrote the questions. Anyway, moving along. Next up, during a log review, an administrator notices that remote employees have been logging in from IP addresses that are not used in any regions that the employees work in. The administrator contacts the employees and discovers that the employees did not log in on those dates and times. What can be implemented to prevent this attack in the future? So it sounds like we've got a bit of a weakness in remote access and authentication. Well, let's see. Give you a chance to think about what options you'd like to see. But our options are introducing multi-factor authentication, access management, password complexity, and blocking unknown public IP addresses from remote access. Now, just by reviewing those, C and D feel like pretty good ideas, but let's just think about them for a moment. Password complexity. I would like to believe that the organization who has remote employees has already got good password complexity in place. So I think this should already be done. If that's not already done, well then, yeah. But let's see, we've already said that they're logging in. So let's just go on the assumption that they are authenticating. Cool. Now, option D sounds like a smart idea, blocking unknown public IP addresses from remote access. But here's the thing. If you are working remotely from home and you've got a residential connection, your ISP is full within their rights to change your public IP address on a regular basis because you never own the public IP address, you rent the thing. Now, some ISPs are pretty cool and they'll keep your public IP address static or at least consistent for a very long time. But if you are unlucky enough, like me, to keep getting your public IP address changing all the time, suddenly you're going to get blocked all the time trying to work remotely. So, no. And you can't also rely on asking the employees what's their public IP because they might not know, first of all. And if you try and say, yeah, we'll allow the employees' public IP addresses, but if it keeps changing all the time, you also can't work on an allow list. So this is not going to work out very well. So I'm not liking that. So this leaves me with multi-factor authentication and access management. So let's see. The attackers are getting in, and we want to stop them. Access management is too broad a term for me to be happy, because that can deal with things like access control, authorization, permissions, and stuff like that. Whereas multi-factor authentication, that could definitely go a long way, because if the attackers are successfully logging in, it's probably the knowledge factor, something that you should know. Because passwords can be guessed, passwords can be discovered, passwords can be socially engineered out of people. But if we introduce multi-factor, like having to have a one-time PIN fob or receiving a one-time PIN via message or something like that, would go a long way. Because the chance of an attacker being able to know your password, if that's what they're using, and then have something, or if we go biometrics, be you, is very small. This could do a lot of good, especially if it's not already being done. The access management, I feel it's too vague. Too vague a recommendation, so I'm not happy with that. I'm going to go with multi-factor authentication, because if that's not being done, that would definitely have the biggest likelihood at preventing these unauthorized remote logins. So an organization is migrating most of its systems to a public cloud solution. Sorry, that always scares me when it comes to security, but let's just read the question properly. After a security assessment, it is determined the risks of this migration are acceptable. Okay, I'll take your word on it. Due to the varied cloud apps and services that employees will engage with, the organization wants to reduce the amount of credentials that the employees need to remember. Which of the following solutions will allow this? Pick two. Whoa. Hang on. So it sounds like they're going to have a lot of apps and services that are not necessarily going to work together. They might have like their own separate user account credentials and stuff like that. They might even be hosted on different clouds. Let's just check. They just said a public cloud solution. They didn't say a specific public cloud service provider. So it could be a multi-cloud setup. I don't know. But it definitely feels like there's going to be a lot of credentials that the employees need to deal with. And they want to keep that to a minimum because that's actually a good idea. Because having lots of things that people need to remember is just encouraging them to start writing that stuff down or not taking things like passwords seriously. So, yeah. But I'm going to give you a chance just to think about that and think about what type of options you'd like to see. Remember, we're going to be looking for two options, though. Now let's look at them. LEAP, or the Lightweight Extensible Authentication Protocol. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. SSO, or single sign-on. PEAP, or Peer Extensible Authentication Protocol. Federation, and Radius. Now, Radius I want to take out straight away. Radius is not adequate for any sort of security over the internet. Using a Radius server for like network access control for the LAN users, that's fine. Person hopping onto the wireless LAN, having to authenticate with Radius, I'm cool with that. Person connecting via a network cable, having to authenticate with Radius while at the office network, I'm cool with that. But with the cloud, where you're going over the internet, and they specified public cloud, so you're definitely going over the internet. Not happy with that. Now the thing is, all of these sound good. But their focus here, let's just quickly remind ourselves what the focus is. They want to reduce the amount of credentials that the users need to remember. So LEAP and PEAP, those are going to do nothing for credential management. So that leaves me with multi-factor, single sign-on, and federation. Now, single sign-on, you're probably thinking straight away, yeah, one authentication, it lets you in for many things. That does sound like a good idea. The multi-factor authentication, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to remember less. It just means you need to possibly do more to authenticate, which is good. And I do believe that multi-factor authentication and single sign-on can help balance each other out. Single sign-on makes things more convenient, whereas multi-factor helps make things more secure at a slight cost of convenience. But the SSO helps to vastly outweigh that convenience cost of multi-factor. But again, we're not looking at improving the security, we're looking at reducing credentials. So I'm not too mad about the MFA, but I'm going to leave it there for now. Let's just consider federation. Now, federation would definitely help in a multi-cloud or disparate software environment where stuff is unable to share credentials and user accounts easily. Federation could be the right thing here. So I'm feeling good about federation. I wasn't so mad about MFA, although it was a good option. I just wasn't mad enough about it. And they did ask us to pick two. So I'm happy with my two choices. Let's move along. So which of the following would be used to prevent direct administrative access to servers while still allowing users to directly access servers via their respective service protocols? Whoa. Hang on. So we need to prevent direct admin access, but still allow ordinary users to communicate with the server normally. Okay. So basically, if I have like a web server and somebody wants to look at the website via a web browser using HTTP or HTTPS, that's fine. But if we have an admin, we don't want them going directly onto the server. Let's see what options we have. I'm just going to give you a chance, though, to pause and think about what you'd like to see. So our options are TACACS Plus, jump servers, load balancers, and proxies. Now, proxy, nah. Because a proxy is more for people going onto the internet when we want to control content, URLs, and stuff like that. So that's not going to do much for preventing direct administrative access. It'll definitely help do content control, and that's a good thing. But it's not what we're after in this question. So, no. TACACS Plus, it's a AAA service. But a AAA service will not necessarily have any impact on whether I can directly or indirectly access something. Authentication, authorization, and accounting will dictate whether I can access something. What level of privilege and permission I will have while accessing it, that's the authorization, and that my activity will be logged, or the accounting. So not really going to have much influence over admins only being indirect and ordinary users being normal. Load balancers, no, that's an availability thing. And I don't see them discussing improving a server's availability. They want to make it harder for admins to access the thing directly, while still allowing direct user access. So that's not in a load balancers game. A jump server, however, yes, that does fit the bill. Because if I set up a jump server, what happens is the admins remote into that. And then the servers that we want to administrate as administrators have been set up to only trust remote connections from the jump server, or the jump box as some people call it. So that does feel like a good option to me. It does feel like the best fit based on the requirements this question has imposed upon us. Otherwise though, I'm pretty happy with that. So let's move along to our 20th question. An online retailer has observed many successful attempts at SQL injections that has led to a large amount of stock loss through illegitimate orders being fulfilled. Oh dear. Which of the following could protect the retailer in the future? I'll give you a chance to think about it, and then let's look. So we've got TLS, database record encryption, web application firewalls, and next generation firewalls. Okay, so they're talking about SQL injections. An SQL injection can be achieved regardless of whether you're using HTTP or HTTPS. So the TLS option's not making a difference. All TLS is going to do is stop an outside observer seeing what you're doing. We're talking about the attackers are engaging and injecting SQL queries through the website into the backend database server. Database record encryption, because they mentioned SQL, you want to gravitate towards a database answer, right? But let's just hold our horses for a moment. There might be more sensible options, because we're looking at the SQL command being injected. Now, an SQL command or a query is able to inject data, edit existing data, delete data. You get the idea. Encrypting stuff's not going to make a big difference yet. That would stop from theft. But let's see, what is the exact attack they described here? They're talking about stock loss, not data theft. Stock loss is where the organization is having their stock lost or stolen, basically. But they're unable to prove it was stolen or effectively catch the thieves. So they're dealing with stock loss, not data theft. So I'm not feeling that record encryption. I'm going to leave it there because I'm sure some of you guys are adamant it would work. But let's look at the web application firewall. A web app firewall is meant to run on a website and basically act as a hyper-specialized content control software firewall, basically, protecting web applications. And the thing is, online retail is very web application heavy. To me, if an SQL injection is working, that means that the attacker is successfully passing an SQL query through, which means there's no filtering. There's nothing catching that unusual, unnatural input that a normal user would not be presenting to this retailer. So I'm feeling good for this. But because I'm feeling good about a firewall, some of you might be saying, but wouldn't a next generation firewall be even better? Next generation firewalls are still conventional network firewalls. And when I say conventional, I mean conventional in the sense that they are a network appliance. And although, yes, you could probably have a next generation firewall do a payload inspection, spot an SQL injection, it might not catch every SQL injection technique. The web application firewall is going to be geared more towards this particular thing. And I can guarantee you that if you actually go and look at how some web application firewall products are being advertised, marketed, and what their features are, I bet you SQL injections and parameterized queries would probably be in their feature set. So I'm going for that. Not that, because that's more for general network threats. The database record encryption is a bit of a red herring. It's there to make you think, SQL, databases, theft, record encryption. But we're not talking about data theft. It's not data theft here. It's people falsifying orders. So I'm taking that out of the equation. All right, moving along. Next up, which of the following security control types does an employee training awareness program best align with? I'll give you a chance to think about what you'd like to see. And here are the options. A, detective, B, compensating, C, corrective, and D, preventative. So, employee training and awareness is meant to help your users become more cognizant of security threats and hopefully avoid them. Now, let's see. Detective, yes, because you can train the employees to help you find and discover security events, indicators of attack, indicators of compromise, stuff like that. But it's not necessarily the best fit, because that is only if you train that one specific topic. You could also consider compensating, as the employees are compensating for the security controls that we're putting in place. We could look at it as being corrective, as it will correct their behavior. But the best one probably would be the preventative, because they are going to help to prevent the incidents from occurring, as a lot of attacks nowadays are going to be based on the employees being manipulated, tricked, or just doing the wrong thing, making mistakes and having accidents. So that's the best fit. Moving along though. Bit of a long one here, we better be careful. A cloud service provider has expanded its vulnerability detection program to allow external individuals to test their public-facing products and services and report any detected vulnerabilities and the methods of exploiting them. The CSP will financially compensate these external individuals based on the type and nature of the vulnerability. What has the cloud service provider effectively set up? I'll give you a chance to think about what you want to see. And our options are a bug bounty program, a red team, open source intelligence, and a security operations center. So I'm not mad about the security operations center, as these people are external individuals, whereas a security operations center would be manned by your own internal staff. So, open source intelligence, you could kind of argue this is a form of open source intelligence, as you are expecting people to share what they discover. But open source intelligence is hapstance. It's just there. It's like looking at an organization's premises on Google Maps with satellite view turned on. So, not really. So that leaves us with a bug bounty and red teaming. Now, the red team is coordinated. This doesn't speak about coordination, because we're getting external individuals to discover things and share it with us, and we're financially incentivizing them for their discovery, not for the hours of work. So red team doesn't feel right, because this is a bug bounty program where you are paying people to discover the bugs, and based on what they discover is what they get paid for it. It's ethical disclosure. So that's what this is, what the cloud service provider has set up, is a bug bounty program. They're actually a pretty cool program. And there are people out there that make a living by doing this. So, pretty cool. Moving along. Which of the following allows for an attacker to run applications on a compromised machine that are not part of the initial exploit? Okay, that's interesting. So, I'm going to give you guys a chance to think about what you'd like to see. You can pause if you need to. Otherwise, here are the options. Cross-site scripting, SQL injection, cross-site request forgery, and remote code execution. So, cross-site scripting, it depends on the kind of cross-site scripting the attacker has done, but realistically, they are going to be messing with the web server. The only one where I could argue that they're running an exploit on a machine that's not part of the initial attack would be if they're doing a reflected cross-site script. But again, now I am looking for a specific kind of answer here and justifying what's here by just going beyond what the question presents. So I'm not too mad about that. With an SQL injection, even though you often are going through a front-end server, normally a web server, and then messing with a back-end database server, that is the entire exploit. That is what SQL injection is. So this is asking us for how would you run an application on a compromised machine that are not part of the initial exploit. So I'm not too mad about SQL injection. Cross-site request forgery? Maybe. Because with the cross-site request forgery, what you're doing is you are relying on access that user has with a server to exploit that server. And you're getting that user to unintentionally engage with that server in a malicious way, like sending a malicious hyperlink. So that is arguable. But the remote code execution, it does feel better. The reason why I say it does feel better is because once I've gained initial access to a compromised machine, I can then, if I've done it right, the initial access I mean, begin executing some sort of malicious application or activity that was not part of my starting attack. So because of that, I feel a bit better about option D being the right answer. C was a sort of a good answer, but D is the better one. And that's sometimes what you're going to be doing, is looking for the better option. Otherwise though, let's move along. An administrator has noticed that many remote employees are logging in remotely from personal devices and not their issued laptops. Which of the following policies needs to be reviewed and or implemented? I'll give you a chance to think about this. But the options are acceptable use policy, bring your own device, work from home, and a social media policy. All right. So acceptable use policy defines what is and is not allowed on the organization's computing resources, including the laptops. But here, we've got people coming in from their personal devices and not their issued devices. So because of that, I'm scratching out acceptable use policy. A bring your own device policy is the better fit here, even though it does sound a bit weird, because bring your own device to the workplace is what they're talking about. But this is remote employees. But it's still the same thing. They're bringing their own device to the workplace. They're just doing so from a remote location. So this does feel like a pretty good fit. But then again, the work from home policy could as well. However, would this still be an issue if the employees were bringing those personal devices to the office and working at the office instead of using their issued devices at the office? And the answer is yes. This would still be a problem if the employees were doing this at the office instead of at home. So the work from home policy isn't specifically the correct fit here. It does sort of make a good sense for the context of the question, being remote, but the issue would still be present whether the person is remote or not. So because of that, I'm scratching that out. Now, social media policy is an important thing to deal with, especially when people are using their personal devices and going onto social media and possibly posting sensitive details about what they do at work and their workplace. But that's not going to make a difference whether the person is logging into the work systems and resources using their personal devices or their work devices. The social media policy would apply regardless. So not really what we're looking for here. So the best fit is the BYOD policy. Normally a good rule of thumb is anytime something's to do with the employees and the users using their personal devices for work is normally going to be the BYOD policy. And an organization not only needs to look at implementing one, but they also need to keep reviewing it, because the behavior people have when it comes to personal devices being used at work for work is always going to evolve and change, as is the case with remote employees using personal devices instead of their work-issued devices. But moving along to question 25. An organization recently experienced a large number of rogue devices present in the workplace. Oh dear. Many were wireless and battery-powered, allowing them to be hidden anywhere. Which of the following could the organization consider implementing? Oh wow, this could be a very interesting set of options, but I'm going to give you a chance to think about what you want to see. Pause if you need to. Otherwise, our options are A, update the content of the new hire documentation. So that'll probably be the onboarding process. Option B, update the process for offboarding departing employees. Option C, review SIEM logs looking for indicators of compromise or IOCs. Or D, add situational awareness and encouragement of reporting to the security training and awareness program. Now, rogue devices, it could be either new staff members that are actually hackers posing as potential candidates just to get physical access to the premises. It could be people that are leaving the organization and have a chip on their shoulder with the soon-to-be former employer. But because both options are viable, I'm not mad about that. And the thing is, it's not necessarily going to stop anybody, because I can't think of a way that an offboarding or an onboarding process could realistically stop somebody planting a rogue device. So I'm not so mad about those. That leaves us with C and D. Now, reviewing the SIEM logs would definitely be a good idea, because we might be able to pick up on the activity of these rogue devices if we now know what to look for, because when it was happening at the time, when it was still an indicator of attack, it might have been very subtle, very stealthy, and very hard to notice. But we're looking at trying to prevent this from going forward by the feel of the question. And because of that, getting your employees to speak up when they notice something weird, like furniture being moved, or a new device plugged into an access switch in the workspace, that could definitely help quite a lot. So that would definitely be worth considering implementing. Getting your employees, your own users, to start becoming detective controls in situations like this could be very, very useful. I still would also consider doing the SIEM log. And this is one of the annoying things about doing these types of security exams, is you're going to get these types of questions where, honestly, all of the options are good ideas to do in general for an organization's security posture. But we must always bear in mind the context of the question. What's right for that particular thing? What do we want to do right away to fix this particular problem? It's a bit frustrating, I will admit, because you look at these options and say, yeah, I'd love to do them all, but what's specific to that question? But anyway, let's move along to the next question. The CSIO wants an organization's senior leadership to be more involved with cybersecurity operations. I like that. The senior administrator has been asked to present to the organization's senior leadership. Cool, so we've got a technical person presenting. That'll be neat. Which data source could be of most help to the senior administrator? I'll give you a chance to think about what options you'd like to see. So our options are a SIEM dashboard, and I'm liking that straight away because it's visual. But let's carry on looking. A summary of network traffic captures. That could be quite insightful and interesting to look at. A vulnerability scanner output could also be pretty useful. Lots of useful details there. Or option D, risk assessment reports. Now, the thing is, they didn't specify who makes up this organization's senior leadership, but there is a very, very good chance that these people are non-technical. Now, if they're non-technical, I'm a bit concerned about their ability to keep up with a summary of traffic captures, because that does require a bit of technical insight and understanding how network forwarding actually happens and what network traffic and packets look like. So I'm not cool with that idea. A vulnerability scanner is not the most complex output, but then again, I'm a technical person and you probably are too. So it's a bit too much, I think, for the senior leadership. So that leaves us with the SIEM dashboard, which I already had a good feeling about right at the beginning, and a risk assessment report. Now, risk assessment reports should ideally be written in a way that anyone within the organization could properly appreciate and gain value from these, but they're probably going to be of little interest to the audience in question. Plus, we're talking about presenting to the leadership. So we're not going to want to sit there just reading reports to them. It'll be boring as anything. A visual while the senior administrator speaks would probably be the most beneficial. So the SIEM dashboard is probably going to be the most helpful way to present the information that is true, genuine, original, but also in a digestible format for both technical and non-technical audience members. So I'm very, very much liking the SIEM dashboard option there. Let's move along. Next one. A SIEM's file integrity monitor has given the following alert on the domain controller. The hash of PowerShell.exe has changed. That doesn't sound good. There were no changes scheduled at the time. That sounds even worse. What has most likely happened? So I'm going to give you a chance to think it through. Imagine what you'd like to see here. Pause if you need to. Otherwise, here are our options. So option A hash collision has occurred. That is a possibility that you could have two different values result in the same hash. But the thing is, they're talking about the hash has changed, not that we've got two separate things presenting the same hash value. So it's not a hash collision, that's for definite. A rootkit was deployed. That could be. A rootkit definitely would mess with something like PowerShell. Might even be using it. So I'm going to leave B on the list for now. Ransomware has been triggered. Now the thing is, ransomware would go after data files, not executables. And that's an executable. So I'm not so mad about the ransomware option. A cross-site script has been executed. That could be, but this is a DC, not a web server. So because of that, I'm not cool with it. I'm digging the rootkit. That makes the most sense. Because there's a good strong chance a rootkit would probably want to work with PowerShell, possibly even use some PowerShell commandlets to try and elevate the attacker's privileges. So it is a pretty viable option there. Next question. Which of the following can be used as an early warning system that allows for gathering of data of an attacker before they have a chance to perform counter forensics? Give you a chance to think about what you'd like to see here. Pause if you want to. Otherwise, our options are Zero Trust Model, Canary System, Honeypot, and a DLP. So a Zero Trust Model is more of a design approach for the entire environment's architecture. So I can't see that being an early warning system, something in particular. So Zero Trust is not doing it for me. It's more of a design paradigm. A canary system? Yeah, a canary system could act as an early warning for us, so I'm going to leave it there. But then again, so can a honeypot as well. So those two options, we're probably going to have to dig deeper and figure out what we got going on here. And then a DLP system. It could also alert us, but only if the attacker is busy doing something that could lead to a data loss event that would be detected and obviously alerted. So I'm not so mad about that. Doesn't feel right. So I'm going to go nah on the DLP system. So that leaves us with Canary and Honeypot. So what's probably going to make the difference here is if we look at the question again, which of the following can be used as an early warning? Both are going to give us the tick on the early warning and also allow us to gather data about the attacker. Now the thing is, a Canary system is designed to fail on attack, to go offline. The whole point of the Canary is when it stops working, that draws our attention to an undesirable situation. But that means also it's not going to be able to capture data, and the attacker is not going to carry on not realizing that we're actually watching them. But a honeypot, on the other hand, that would stay online and would allow us to monitor, log, and record what the attacker is up to before they have a chance to try and cover their tracks with counter forensic techniques. So because the honeypot is meant to stay online, I'm going to go with that. Mainly because the Canary could definitely give us an early warning, probably even better than the honeypot would, but it will not stay online and therefore not give us an opportunity to gather information and evidence on the attacker. So we're going to go with the honeypot there. Next up, which approach would best isolate an ICS or an industrial control system that is managing a critical process at an industrial organization? So I'm going to give you a chance to think about what you would like to see as far as ICS isolation is concerned. But our options are segmentation, air gap isolation, system hardening, and enterprise patch management. Okay, so let's see. Segmentation, yeah, we could use that as a way of isolating an industrial control system by making sure it's in its own network segment. So I'm going to leave that option on the table. Air gap isolation, which is probably the ultimate form of segmentation, is also a very, very good way of isolating very vulnerable systems like industrial control systems, legacy systems, and stuff like that. So let's leave that on the table as well. System hardening? I don't know, because industrial control systems aren't necessarily going to be running on conventional computers. So system hardening advice like that you see for servers and clients and so forth, probably not going to be a good fit here. I'm not going to go with that one. Enterprise patch management, same story. Enterprise patch management is for software products that are being maintained by a tech vendor. Think of like Windows, Linux, the services that we run on those things. Those are going to get updated by the developer. An industrial control system, on the other hand, is not a conventional piece of software where it's worth having a team of people regularly patching and updating. You'd have the process engineers who built the thing doing the updates. So enterprise patch management ain't the right option here. Yes, we'd apply updates whenever necessary, but updating an ICS would probably be more of a actual planned event rather than just, oh, there's an update, let's go and apply it according to enterprise patch management best practices. So that leaves us with segmentation. Now, here's where it gets tricky, because segmentation allows for WAN connectivity, whereas air gapping is an extreme form of segmentation that doesn't allow for WAN connectivity. So let's review that question again. Which approach would best isolate? Best isolate an ICS that is managing a critical process at an industrial organization. How critical? I don't know, but it could definitely be the difference between life and death and environmental catastrophe and stuff like that. And they haven't mentioned SCADA, which means that I'm not worrying about something that actually coordinates and controls ICSs. So because of that, segmentation doesn't feel like a good idea. Air gapping feels like the better choice. All right, question 30. An organization is being targeted by an Advanced Persistent Threat Actor group, or an APT. On several occasions, they have successfully bypassed the public-facing firewall and suppressed any alerts coming from the firewall. Okay, these guys are pretty good then. What could the organization implement that would quickly allow them to regain alert and detection capabilities? So let's have a look at the options, which are having a SIEM, having an IDS, a DLP, or a proxy. So the thing is, the DLP, yes, definitely is going to be a alerting and detection tool, but not for somebody bypassing a security control. So no. A proxy is more of a preventative control that's going to stop people going to things they're not meant to go to. So definitely not. So that leaves me with the IDS and the SIEM, which are both detective controls. Now, let's review. What could the organization implement that would quickly allow them to regain alert detection? I'm going to go with the IDS, because an IDS can be deployed and you can use a very simple form of analysis like signature analysis that can be used day one. You could also use a bit of heuristics or behavioral anomalies. It's up to you. But the thing is, an IDS can be deployed and get up and running quickly. Deploying a SIEM, yes, would definitely give you better alert and detection capabilities. But for a SIEM to truly start showing value, it takes a long time to refine the alert criteria and get it working the way you want it to. And this organization is being targeted by an APT, and they're not going to pause so that you can implement your SIEM and refine it. They're going to keep going at you. So the IDS seems to be the quicker way to regain that alerting and detection capability. And chances are, yes, you probably would have to maybe refine the IDS a little bit, but you'll get it done quicker than you would an entire SIEM. So yes, I definitely think the IDS would be a better option here. The SIEM is just going to take too long to start showing value. So because of that, it's out of the equation. Moving along though. Next up, a user embedded sensitive internal data into photographs using steganography and uploaded them to an image sharing social media site. What best describes what the user has done? I'll give you a chance to think about the options you want to see. Pause if you need to. Otherwise, here are options. A, they've done a penetration test. B, they've installed a remote access Trojan or a RAT. C, they've performed data exfiltration. Or D, a form of hacktivism. Well, it definitely isn't a penetration test. That is for sure. Because at no point did they mention that the user did this with any sort of permission or authorization. Add to that as well, they put it on a social media site, a public platform. If this were a test, you wouldn't be using a social media site. You would be using something external, but a bit more private. So it's definitely not that. They also have not done a remote access Trojan, as a remote access Trojan is a piece of malware that is going to give an external attacker remote access to your system. Doesn't sound like that's what the attacker has done. That leaves us with data exfiltration and hacktivism. If you're leaning towards data exfiltration, you are correct. It's not hacktivism necessarily, although the user might be annoyed with their employer. They are not doing it for a social reason. Add to that as well, hacktivists are usually external, not internal. So it's not activism, it's data exfiltration. They've embedded sensitive data using steganography into multimedia and uploaded it to a social media site. So that's what they've done. Moving along to our next question. Signed digital certificates used for secure communications are most commonly associated with which of the following port numbers? I'll give you a chance to think about which port numbers you'd like to see here for signed digital certificates. But let's have a look at our options if you haven't already paused. So we've got port 110, that is Post Office Protocol version 3. We have got port 636, that is LDAP-S. We have got port 443, which is HTTPS. And then we've got port 444, which has got a lot of things going on it if you go and look it up. And a lot of it is malicious. The only secure thing that I am aware of on port 444 is Sophos firewall administration through a web console. So, let's run through this. Signed digital certificates for secure communications is what we're after here, and what we most commonly associate with it. Now, POP3, that's the unencrypted version, so that's out of the equation. Port 444's got way too much going on, and if this is the first time you've heard of port 444 being used for something, then that's a good reason to not trust it. Just because you haven't heard it before doesn't mean it's the right answer. So that leaves us with LDAP-S and 443, both of which are using TLS and therefore digital certificates, but we're after the most commonly associated one, and that's HTTPS. So that's the answer we're going to go with here. Although LDAP-S, you could argue, yes, that does count. Most people are going to be familiar with 443. Not that many people are familiar with 636. So we're going for most commonly associated. Sometimes the straightforward option is the correct one. But this is one of those questions that you might see in the exam where they, not this question exactly, but something like this, where they're testing your knowledge of port numbers. So it is worth memorizing those port numbers. Even if you do forget some of them after you've written the exam, given enough time and enough repetition, some of them are going to stick, and that's fine. And you know what? There's no shame in the real world looking up a port number to just be sure about what you are dealing with. On to our next question. Which of the following describes attribution and attestation of the identity individual who sends an email? So our options are confidentiality, integrity, availability, and non-repudiation. So attribution and attestation of the identity of the individual who sends an email. So to claim and prove identity is not confidentiality. Confidentiality is about keeping data restricted, so it's not that. Integrity is about validating that the data is original, untampered with, and correct. Not really that. Availability is about making sure that the data is available to those who need to access it when they need to access it. So it's not availability. Leaving us with non-repudiation, which is proving that, hey, if I sent you something, there's proof I sent it. If you received something, there's proof you received it. It's going to stand up in the court of law. That's what non-repudiation basically boils down to being. So we've got that one done. Moving along. Next up, which of the following is used to make passwords stored using one-way transformations harder to reverse engineer? I'm going to let you think on this one. Pause if you want to consider your options. Otherwise, our options are A, salting, B, key stretching, C, steganography, or D, complexity. So let's review the question quickly. Passwords being stored using one-way transformations. That means we're looking at something to do with hashes. Cool. And we're trying to make them harder to reverse engineer. Okay, cool. So let's see, complexity. Well, complexity is going to make a password better regardless of whether we're storing it using reversible or non-reversible security. So, not really, to make it harder to reverse engineer. But I'm going to leave it there for now. Key stretching, not really. That's for cryptography. That's literally the key that encrypts and decrypts data, making it longer to make it suitably long enough for the cryptographic algorithm in question. So it's not that. We're looking at passwords here for authentication. Steganography, I don't think we'd be storing our passwords as pictures, and steganography is two-way because you can pull the data out of the picture once you know it's there and you've got the correct steganographic utility. So it's not that. Salting, on the other hand, that is where we're adding some extra binary data to the password before it gets hashed so that it offsets the hash value, preventing a rainbow table from being a straightforward exercise for the attacker to figure out what your password is if they get their hands on the hash value. So salting is the right option. Although complexity would definitely improve a password security, it's not going to improve it for the criteria that the question is specifying, which is to make a one-way transformation harder to reverse engineer. The answer is salting, not the complexity this time. Moving along though. Our next question is, which of the following is needed for an organization to maintain business operations during a disaster event? I'm going to give you a chance to think about the options you want to see here. Pause if you want to. But our options are a DRP or disaster recovery plan, B, a business continuity plan, C, an RPO or recovery point objective, and D, an SLA. So let's review. Which of the following is needed for the organization to maintain operations during a disaster? So the SLA, that's not for disaster. That's just for general operations and putting recovery points, recovery time, objectives, availability, and stuff like that. Speaking of recovery point objective, that's again for normal SLA documentation. Those two are linked. Okay, that leaves us with DRPs and BCPs. Now, although there is a trend right now to wrap everything up into DR plans, which I'm okay with, we are looking at maintaining operations during a disaster, not restoring them. So this would be mainly focusing on what are our critical operations and how we're going to keep them going during some horrible, unpleasant, impactful event. And business continuity fits the bill better here. If you're tempted to go for disaster recovery plan, I don't blame you. That's the diversion option there. That's your second best choice if BCP was not present. Now, if BCP was not present, I probably would have gone for a DRP. But otherwise, no, the BCP is the better fit for maintaining operations during a disaster. The DR plan is more about recovering all of your operations and restoring stuff as back to normal as possible post-disaster. So B is our best option here, not A. Moving along though, to question 36. A policy change in an organization has led to user privilege and admin rights being assigned based on job role and not position in the organization hierarchy. Oh, that sounds the right thing to do. Oh, that makes me happy to hear that kind of sentence. Sorry, you've got no idea the types of things I've dealt with in the workplace and still continue to deal with to this day. Oh, reading a sentence like that is a pleasure. Sorry. This is an example of what technique. So I'm going to give you a chance to think about the options you'd like to see. But our options are A, system hardening, B, job rotation, C, separation of duties, and D, principle of least privilege. Well, let's see, it's a policy to do with people and their access rights. So it's not system hardening because that's a technical thing. That leaves us with B, C, and D, which all three are people-related practices. So let's see. Job rotation is about moving people out of a position into another position so that they don't get too comfortable and don't get up to any mischief. It also exposes them to different tasks, skills, workflows, and stuff like that, which is really good for contingency in case somebody is unavailable to do that job. But this is about their privileges and their admin rights being granted based on job role. So kind of a fit, but the job rotation is more about just making sure the person doesn't stay static and gets up to mischief. That's the main goal there. So I'm not overly thrilled about job rotation. We might bring it back, we'll see. But let's see how C and D look. Separation of duties is making sure that no one person is able to do a whole critical process. So for instance, the person who authorizes payments is not the one who's allowed to load the payments into the financial system. You need at least two people for an invoice to be loaded, authorized, and paid, maybe more. So separation of duties is trying to make sure that no one person controls a critical process where fraudulent and misbehaviors could take place. That leaves us with principle of least privilege, which is the idea that we give people exactly the admin rights, the access rights, the permissions, and so forth for them to do their jobs, but nothing more. Giving people privileges based on their job roles and not their position within the hierarchy. Oh, that is definitely principle of least privilege. Because even if you are senior to somebody, doesn't mean you get better rights than that person. You might get different rights. You might get more access to some data they don't get access to. But the people below you might have better rights administratively than you do. It all depends on exactly what the job role is. So principle of least privilege is the better fit. Job rotation, I was clutching at straws there to give us some debate and deliberation. Otherwise, though, let's move on to our next question, which is, which of the following would be a best practice for limiting physical access to network infrastructure like a switch? So basically, we're trying to think about stopping rogue hardware, unauthorized access, and stuff like that. I'll give you a chance to think about the options you want to see. Pause it if you need to. Otherwise, our options are disable unnecessary accounts, baseline configurations, enable access lists, or disable unused interfaces. So let's see, we want to stop physical access to the network infrastructure, like with an access switch in a user area, okay? Turning off unnecessary accounts is probably not going to do much to make the network more physically secure. It would definitely help with computers, but not necessarily the network. A baseline configuration, well, that's always a good idea. Having a good starting point for good secure configuration would definitely be a good idea. So I'm going to leave that in there for now. Enabling access lists. What kind of access lists are we talking about here? They're being vague, so I'm not happy with that. And then D, disabling unused interfaces. I do like that. That is normally a very good practice where when you have access switches in user and guest accessible areas, that besides putting them away in a nice locked networking cabinet, you also log into the switch, assuming it's a manageable switch, and you turn off any interface that is not actually plugged into a network cable for a computer right now. Yes, it does mean you need an admin to come along and turn the interface on if you want to plug in a new device to that switch, but so what? Price of security sometimes does mean slightly inefficient operations. So let's review the question just to see if that will help us eliminate one of the undesirable options. Which of the following would best limit physical access to a network switch? Physical access. Well, physically turning off an interface sounds like a physical access thing. Baseline config is a pretty good option. I'll be perfectly honest, if it weren't for that disable unused interfaces, I would have probably gone for that. But because it's there, because we got turning off an interface physically through commands, I'm happy with that. So let's move along now. Next up, which of the following devices would be most useful for ensuring availability for an online retailer when there's a larger than normal number of requests to access their website? So I'll give you a chance to think about the options you want to see here. Pause if you have to. But the options are protocol analyzer, VPN concentrator, load balancer, or an intrusion prevention system, or IPS. So protocol analyzer, don't get me wrong, is really useful for us to understand what's going on in a network. But we already know what's going on. An online retailer has got a large number of web requests coming through, and they're battling to keep up. So a protocol analyzer is going to be for investigation, but we're not doing that here. We're trying to fix a problem, not investigate a problem. A VPN concentrator is obviously a very popular option whenever you hear about something to do with people accessing something. But this is customers accessing an online retailer's website, not remote users. So I don't really think many customers would be using a VPN to access a retailer's website. A load balancer, that feels pretty good. I like the idea of a load balancer because that means we're going to have redundant web servers. And when the demand for web access increases, maybe due to the online retailer having a sale or something like that, the load balance would help spread that workload across the redundant nodes. I do like that option. And then an intrusion prevention system. It's just an IDS that goes and does something about an intrusion. This is not an intrusion. This is an overwhelmingly large number of requests. This is a non-malicious denial of service we're talking about here, really. Well, non-malicious DDoS to be precise. So an IPS wouldn't really help us here apart from just making the unavailability worse. A load balancer is going to help better with what is effectively an availability issue. That's what we're dealing with here, an availability problem. Okay, cool. So let's move on now to our next question. Which of the following solutions would best help enforce the acceptable use policy of an organization? So the AUP, or acceptable use policy, is governing what people are and are not allowed to do. And we want to see what we can do to help enforce this policy. I'll give you a chance to think about the options you want to see here. But otherwise, our options are, we could implement a proxy server. We could implement a data loss prevention system, or a DLP. We could look at an intrusion detection system, or an IDS, or we could consider a next generation firewall. So the proxy server is feeling good here for a change, because we use a proxy server to control what URLs and content a user may access online. And that would definitely help us enforce an acceptable use policy, prohibiting and preventing people from going onto websites that they're just not meant to be going onto while at work. So the proxy is feeling really good here. But let's investigate the other options. A data loss prevention system? I don't really see data loss necessarily falling under the acceptable use policy. Maybe the code of conduct, not stealing from your organization and stuff like that. But the acceptable use policy should be governing what is acceptable use of an organization's computing resources. So the DLP, yeah, you could argue, but you're arguing too hard, so take it out. An intrusion detection system? It's more for the external people coming in, not the users needing to be told how to behave or forced to behave. So I'm going to take that out of the equation. Now you could argue for a next generation firewall, as that could contain a proxy server. But the simpler option would be a proxy server. They're asking for something to help enforce an acceptable use policy, not something to do an acceptable use policy enforcement, traffic filtering, and everything else that a next generation firewall could do. Now, in reality, I probably would consider a next generation firewall as a deployment option because that would give me a proxy and a whole load of extras, but that might be beyond an organization's scope or budget, or they might already have one. And here we're just looking at what do we need to enforce acceptable use policies, and a proxy is a far more sensible option here. It's going to be to the point and probably way more effective as well. Either way though, let's move on to the next question. So for question 40, we've got a long one again. An organization has conference rooms with network connectivity that is used both by guests and employees. Employees need access to internal resources, while guests need to only have access to the internet. Well, that makes sense. This needs to be done with the same network infrastructure in those conference rooms. Ooh. Which of the following would best meet these requirements? Okay. So shared infrastructure, we're not going to run like a new access point or a new network cable or anything like that for staff or guests. We're going to use what's already there, so that means we need to split them. I'm going to let you think about how we would split them across a logical method and what options you'd like to see here to do that. Pause if you need to. Otherwise, though, our options are the following. Oh, we've got double options here. So we've got implementing a network address translation solution and a DMZ or a demilitarized zone. We could do a VPN and IPsec. We could use switches and firewalls. Or we could use some 802.1x network authentication service and VLANs. So let's run through these options here. We've got using NAT and a DMZ. Now, NAT and a DMZ is not going to make much difference when it comes to keeping guests and employees separated from one another using the same LAN infrastructure, because NAT setups and DMZs are to do with your perimeter and your egress to the internet. So it's not really going to help much. You'd probably be doing it, but it's not helping in this situation. A VPN, that you might want to go to because you're hearing about guests and the guest might want to have a VPN connection back to their workplace. But the thing is, it's not your responsibility to make sure that your guests have secure access to their own employer. That's their employer's problem. So because of the VPN thing there, I'm straight away not digging B. And IPsec, that's just an encryption service that we can run. So is that going to help? I don't know. Yeah, it could help keep our staff members' traffic safe, but nah, not digging it. Switches and firewalls. Okay, cool. Are we just using a cheap commercial switch that you buy at the local computer shop that doesn't really do much other than just basically forwarding based on destination MAC address? Or are we doing proper fancy enterprise switches where we've got configurable options that could help us? Doesn't specify. And then a firewall. Yeah, we would have firewalls, but again, I don't see that doing much to keep guests and users or staff members separated using the same LAN infrastructure. But D, that's got VLANs. Having a staff VLAN and a guest VLAN, straight away I'm digging that. And then throwing in 802.1x to authenticate at least the staff members makes some sense. But you could also have 802.1x authenticating the guests, as the guests could be given a temporary one-time password or something like that. So that's going to be a pretty good option based on the specified requirements that they are after here. So best fit is the VLANs with 802.1x, which is basically network access control and authentication. Much better option. Moving along though, a security administrator believes that a network breach occurred as a result of a misconfigured access rule that granted outside access to a poorly secured jump box, which uses RDP. Which of the following should the admin use when searching the log files? So I'll let you think about what kind of search criteria the admin could use. Think about the options you want to see. Pause if you want to. Otherwise, our options are failed authentication attempts, network scans, connections to port 3389 from public IP addresses, or unusual time of day usage. So let's see. All of these are pretty decent options, to be honest. So let's focus on some key details in the question. So the security administrator believes that a network breach has occurred because there's a bad rule that granted outside access to a jump box that uses RDP. Alright, so the failed authentication attempts could be pretty useful, but we're already looking at the possibility that the breach was successful, that the attacker somehow managed to get in. I'm not worrying about the times the attacker missed the target. This time I'm worrying about when the attacker hit their target. So let's not worry about their misses. Let's start looking for their hits. Network scans. Yes, that would definitely be an indicator of reconnaissance, but we're already worrying about the attacker having gained initial access. So I'm not looking for a recon indicator right now. Connections using port 3389, which is RDP's port number, and public IPs are outside, so that is sitting quite well with me so far. Now, unusual time of day usage is a very, very common indicator for attacks because a lot of skilled attackers who get into our networks and cause some havoc, they will usually try and favor times of the day where response is likely to be slow or non-existent. So an unusual time of the day is a good thing to look for, but it's not going to be concrete enough. And we already have details like RDP, outside access, and C is ticking both of those boxes, so I'm digging that. Otherwise, I probably would have considered unusual time of the day usage if it weren't for a better option that had more details matching the question. So let's strike that one out and go with option C. Moving along now to our next question. After remediating vulnerabilities, what should be done next as part of vulnerability management? I'll give you a chance to think about your options, see what you want to see, pause if you want to, but our options are conducting an internal audit, update the vulnerability database, rescan the system, or harden the system. So thinking about this, let's see. After we've remediated or fixed vulnerabilities, what should we do next as part of a vulnerability management process? So an internal audit, the vulnerability management process could be part of an internal audit, or it could be preparing for an internal audit. I don't know. They seem too parallel to me. I'll leave it for now though. Updating the vulnerability database. That might be viable, but here's my thing. How do we know we actually did fix the vulnerabilities? That's always the niggling question. We do something to remediate and remove the vulnerabilities we detected. We should probably go and check again with the same definitions that those vulnerabilities are no longer being detected by the scanner. So updating the database might be a bad idea until we've had a chance to recheck. And we do have rescanning the system here. So if I choose B, I can't have C. If I choose C, I can't have B. So those are an either-or option. But I don't like the idea of just jumping straight to an update of the vulnerability database and definitions. I would rather do something like rescanning first. So rescanning feels good there. I'm liking that. But what about hardening the system? Well, technically speaking, vulnerability management is part of the system hardening practices we encourage. So we're kind of already doing that, unless they want us to do even more, but then they must elaborate more. So I'm not liking that. So leaving either A and C or A and B, because remember they have to be one or the other. I'm thinking C here. Because if I fix some vulnerabilities, I want to check that they're gone. Rescan the system to see if the vulnerabilities have gone away, decreased, etc. But I definitely leave the databases alone until I'm ready for my next vulnerability management cycle. Because if I fix some vulnerabilities, but I update my definitions before I rescan, I might actually find I have more vulnerabilities because of the newer definitions, even though I've done a lot to fix the old ones. So I want to measure with the same ruler at the end, not with a different one. And as I said, the internal audit feels too parallel to that. So those are our best options there. C, rescanning the system feels right. Moving along. Question 43. As part of improving security processes, an organization has decided that log files should regularly, throughout the day, be replicated, rotated, and passed for any common IOCs or indicators of compromise. Which would help make this successful? I'm going to give you a chance to think about the options you'd like to see. Pause if you want to think a bit longer. But our options are manual log analysis, automation, machine learning, and archiving. So running through our options here, manual log analysis, that would definitely help find IOCs, but is it going to be feasible for somebody to be manually replicating, rotating, in other words, backing up and archiving, and then reviewing the logs? I would want to get a good pay for that. I really would, because it sounds boring. I think it's going to be too tedious and too human involved, so I'm rather going to scratch that. Automation. It's a bit broad, but I could write a script that backs up, archives, and then skims through the log for common IOCs. As long as I've got some characteristics that I could put in the script and use some regular expressions to scan through a script and find some indicators. Yeah, that's doable. Machine learning. The thing is, we need a system that already has the ability to collect the logs, review them, and then alert us to IOCs so that a machine learning algorithm only has to have one point of contact where all the data is being made available to it. So without a seam, and they haven't mentioned a seam here, machine learning is a little bit of a buzzword answer. So I'm not digging buzzword answers here. Archiving, that does fit two of the three things they're after. They're after replication and rotation. And archiving does help with that. But parsing for common IOCs, So I could automate the collection of the logs, the rotation, the archiving, the analysis aspect. That could all be automated. So I'm digging that. Whereas archiving is just giving me only two of the three things that they're really after. So I'm going to go with automation for that one. Now let's go on to the next question, which asks us, after deploying a new firewall, support tickets claim that clients have not been obtaining IP addresses. Which port number should be opened on the firewall to resolve this? Okay, so it seems we've implemented a firewall and we've been a little bit overzealous with blocking stuff. Oh dear. So think about the kind of options you want to see here. They're probably going to be port numbers. Pause if you need to. Otherwise, let's have a look at our options, which is port 25, 67, 123, and 53. So port 25, that is SMTP. Port 67 is DHCP. And if you guys are all going, yeah, that's the one, I agree with you. But let's just make sure we know what the other ones are in case there's a better option. Port 123 is the Network Time Protocol, or NTP. And port 53 is DNS. So let's see. SMTP, that's emails. And we're talking about not getting IP addresses on client machines. So that's got nothing to do with emails. Your email won't arrive if you haven't got an IP address. So we're not even at the point of worrying about port 25 yet. In this case, your email won't send actually, because SMTP is your outgoing email protocol. DHCP, yes, that does fit best, but let's just make sure we're clear on the other two as well. NTP, or the Network Time Protocol, is literally what it sounds like. It's the protocol that lets us know what the time is through the network. That won't affect you getting an IP address, I promise you that. And then DNS, that's got nothing to do with you getting an IP address. What it does is it tells you, hey, this is the IP address of a URL or a domain name or something like that. But it doesn't affect your ability to get an IP address for yourself to communicate with. So not DNS. Although it does involve IPs, it's not about obtaining an IP address for yourself. So DHCP is the option that we want to go with here. Let's move along. Next up, a national cloud service provider wants to expand its operations in other countries to provide better geographical redundancy and improve performance to potential customers in those regions. Which of the following risks should be considered first? So keep in mind, this is a national or small-scale cloud service provider, and they want to go big. They want to go international. So with that in mind, think about some options you want to see. Pause this if you need to. But our options are they going to worry about time zone differences causing logging challenges? Because they definitely would if you don't factor in time zone differences for the different data centers around the world. Increased risk of hackers coming in from those countries? Possibility, yes. But honestly, what stops the hacker targeting you when they're in another country already? In fact, if the hacker is in a country that you are not in, and there's no jurisdiction, there's no extradition treaties and stuff like that, makes no difference of whether you're thinking about putting up operations there or not. In fact, they're probably going to be less inclined once you have got operations, because now you've got a presence in the legal jurisdiction. So that changes things for them. Then local data protection regulations. Oh yeah, I'd definitely be thinking about that. And then natural disasters in those countries. I'd also be thinking about that as well. So let's see. I've already killed the option B before we even finish getting through it all, so let's just scratch that out. So time zone differences, they could definitely cause challenges with logging, but nothing that couldn't be easily overcome either. So either we'll realize that before we even start, solve the problem, and not even think about it ever again. Or it'll happen, and we'll figure it out and fix it quite quickly. It's not going to be a big crisis, I don't think. Let's see. Local data protection regulations and natural disasters. It's a tough one, actually, because it depends on where you're looking at moving to. But they haven't specified whether the country is meteorologically or geographically stable or volcanically stable or anything like that. And even in countries that are prone to natural disasters, it's not like the whole country experiences an earthquake or the whole country gets a flood or something like that. There are going to be parts of that country, there's going to be regions where the natural disasters are less impactful. Plus, you can make plans around that, or you can just not go where natural disasters are going to be an issue for a cloud service provider. But more and more countries are implementing data protection regulations. And whenever an organization starts operating in that country, they're subject to those regulations in addition to the ones they're already subject to in their home country. So I'm going to go with the current trend of data protection regulations and the concerns around them. Although the natural disasters feel good, it's not difficult for somebody to find out, oh, that country gets floods, that country has earthquakes, that country has some other horrible thing happening. But not everyone's fully cognizant of what data protection regulations are applicable in various countries around the world. Yes, during the videos we touched on things like ZIPA, COPPA, GDPR, and so forth. But there are way more countries than the USA and the European Union, which I know is not a country, but still. There's way more regions, there's way more policies. That's a more pressing concern. Moving along. All right. Looks like we've got an exhibit question. So let's have a squiz. An MDM log shows the following. We'll have a look at it just now. Let's first look at the question and then figure out what we're seeing. Which of the following security concerns should be escalated and investigated? Now, with these kind of exhibit questions, I would suggest we look at the options first, and that kind of gives us some clues about which logs we're most interested in. But let's run through it while jumping back and forth between that and the options. So let's have a squiz. First option is app ID 10788. All right, let's see. Anywhere where we see app ID, yeah, there we go. App IDs are there. App ID 10788 added. Cool. Inventory and vent. Okay. Oh, we've got geographic locations. That's cool. Time of the day. That's very early in the morning. I'm assuming it's a 24-hour clock, obviously. And apparently it's iPhone number 23. Not the 23rd model. It's obviously just an inventory number at that workplace. Okay. So that's interesting time of the day, but I mean, there's another event at more or less the same time of the day, about 7 minutes earlier. The locations seem pretty much next to each other. So I'm not too worried about that. Let's see, storage use is high. Do you have anything that's indicating? Yes, we do. Storage use alert, 80% storage is up. Status event, location, doesn't seem too out of the ordinary with most of them. 8 o'clock on the dot. Well, that kind of thing doesn't surprise me. I mean, if my phone was quite low on storage, I'd expect a very, very round time of the day notification to an MDM. Because that's obviously the phone generating that as opposed to some sort of user activity, which would be any time of the day. Impossible travel. Ooh, yeah, look here. So we've got most things 41 degrees north and then suddenly 39 degrees north. Okay, that's not a big deal. Then 88 west, 88 west, 88 west, 125 east, 88 west, 89 west. It's not impossible to travel there, but hang on. We did that travel in 3 minutes. No, there's no way in hell. There is no way that we traveled that easily. So I'm feeling good about that one. And then we've also got suspicious time of the day usage. Now, the thing about suspicious time of day usage is who uses iPhone number 23 at this workplace? Because if it is the receptionist, that is an odd time of the day. If it is an IT administrator, maybe they're conducting a change. If it's a security person, maybe they're responding to an incident. Maybe it's a night guard. Maybe it's somebody working night shift. We don't know. All right, so let's see. App ID, an app being installed. That doesn't scare me unless we know what is app 10788. So I'm not worried about that. Storage use high, that makes me a bit nervous because why is that storage suddenly, well, maybe it's not suddenly, but why is that storage so heavily used? Especially following the strange thing, which is a sudden travel from the Western Hemisphere to the Eastern Hemisphere in 3 minutes. That's odd. Nah, I'm sorry, that's too much. That is too suspicious for me. Looking at that location versus that time and location, that is not doable. That is not human. So something's up there. Somehow, somebody managed to spoof this device, but we picked up on the location still. Now, probably what we should go and do as a further follow-up would be to go and see where that is and find out if it's a suspicious thing or not. But without going to be able to do that, because obviously you're not going to be able to do that in the exams, you definitely know that's something to look into. And then maybe I would follow up with that storage usage. But if there is storage alerts like that going back several days, then that's probably just the device is pretty full from just usage. But yeah, that is way too big a red flag for my liking. I would definitely have to look into that. I'm happy with the impossible travel. Let's move along. Okay, question 47. A security administrator wants to implement multi-factor authentication that uses knowledge factor and a biometric factor. Which of the following would meet the needs? So I'll let you think about it. Pause if you want to. But our options are going to be PKI and geo-IP tracking, an authentication token with facial recognition, a password and a thumbprint, and smart cards and a user-selected PIN code. All right, so let's see. We're looking for something that's got knowledge and biometrics. So you've got to know the thing, and it's got to be something to do with your physiology. Cool. Public key infrastructure, you don't need to know your certificate, so it's just given to you, so it's more possession. And then geo-IP tracking, that's location-based, so that's a double negative there. An authentication token, you got to have the thing. And facial recognition, okay, that's biometrics. So we fell short on the authentication token, but we're okay with biometrics. But still, we're looking for both, not one of them. A password, that's knowledge. A thumbprint, that's biometrics. That feels good. Let's just check though. A smart card, you got to have the thing. So that's a no. A user-selected PIN code. Okay, that is knowledge. So that does get us that, but because we're short on one. So because passwords and thumbprints are meeting the requirements, that's the answer there. It does sound a little bit too easy though. I mean, you compare the other ones, they all sound cool and elegant and fancy. Don't let fancy things misguide you. What did the administrator want? Knowledge and biometrics. What's going to give them knowledge? Passwords. What will work for biometrics? Thumbprints. Are they doable? Yes. Would people be comfortable with them? Yes. Would people understand how to work with them? More than likely. Thumbprint, maybe you need to explain a little bit, but once you tell the person, put your fingerprint or your thumb there, off you go. So that's pretty good. Now off we go to the next question. All right, the next question is, using a firewall, traffic content filtering, endpoint protection, and a network IDS would be considered what? Oh, the options are probably going to tell us what is considered. So I'll let you think, what could those things have in common? What would make them related? And then let's look at the options. So would it be redundant design? Let's see, firewall, content filtering, endpoint protection, network IDS. I don't see them being redundant. I don't see the traffic content filtering making up for a shortcoming on the firewall. I don't see endpoint protection making up for either of the other two coming short, so I don't feel redundant. Layered security, yeah, I do like it because the firewall's like a boundary. The content filtering is trying to make sure the users don't go to dangerous places and do things they're not meant to do at work. Endpoint protection is helping to stop the devices get infected. And then an IDS would help us know about somebody who's circumvented the preventative controls. So layered security, this feels good because these are protecting us in different ways at different levels. Separation of duties, this is a human thing. So no. Application control, well, the endpoint protection platform definitely would be application control. But a firewall is not necessarily going to block an application, especially if it's a packet filtering firewall. So, and an IDS is not going to stop anything. It's not going to control anything. It's just going to draw our attention to things. So, layered security it is. Moving along. Question 49. Which of the following would be best to use in place of Telnet for secure administration? Now, if you paid close attention to some of the videos in this series, you know my feelings. You know what I'm going to say. But I'd like you to think about the options you'd like to see. And let's explore them. Because the options are RPC or remote procedural call, which is command driven, so that would definitely align with Telnet. HTTPS, yes, we could use HTTPS for remote administration, assuming that what we're looking at is going to support web console-based administration. WMIC, or the Windows Management Instrumentation Control, that does allow for remote command-driven administration, but yeah, I don't like that. And for those of you who have watched the series properly and remember things like I say, you know I'm going to want to say SSH. So let me just get that out the way and say SSH, because that is the answer. But let's understand why the other three are not. So remote procedural calls are not necessarily going to be secure. They can also be clear text. Also, their support is not very consistent because you sometimes get very, very platform-specific RPC features and protocols. So no. I already kind of killed the HTTPS because yes, it is more secure than Telnet and we can use it for administration. But if the thing does not support HTTPS-based administration, then it's not an option. WMIC is a oh no, because that's where Eternal Blue comes from. That's what WannaCry, that's what Petya, that's what a whole load of interesting exploits use to get in to a Windows-based system. So I'm not cool with WMIC. I don't care what any course material or exam says. I'm not cool with that. SSH is the better alternative to Telnet. It'll do everything Telnet does and do it with encryption. It's a good drop-in replacement. The other three have too much ifs and buts and conditions and their own security concerns. Look, I'm not saying Secure Shell doesn't have its own security concerns, but it definitely is the better fit. Now, let's move along to our last question. When deploying a new firewall, which of the following tasks should be done first? This should be interesting. I'll let you think about what you would want to do first on a firewall. Think about your options. Pause if you want to. Otherwise, our options are A, change the default admin credentials and enable admin activity logging. That does sound good. B, install the redundant power supply module. That also sounds good. C, set the firewall to monitor mode to determine what traffic usually passes through the firewall. That's actually not a bad option. There's a lot of security practitioners out there that would do that on the initial deployment of a firewall. Let it run in monitor mode, capture the traffic, and then start going through it and working out, yes, this is necessary, no, this is not, and then go from there. Not a bad idea. You're definitely going to have a lot less trouble tickets and changes needing to be made in the first few months once you go out of monitor mode into an enforcement mode. So that's not a bad choice either. And then option D, check for an update for the firewall from the vendor. That's also a good idea because you don't know how long that particular firewall has been sitting in a box somewhere waiting for you to buy it. We'd like to believe that it was shipped recently. It arrived at the supplier a day or two before we ordered it, and it was manufactured maybe a few weeks before. But in reality, that particular model that you bought could have been sitting on a warehouse shelf for months or even years before it finally landed up in your hands. So checking for an update is not a bad idea. So these are all good options. So what do we do? Well, let's think. This is a security appliance, and default admin credentials on a security appliance scare me. I want to change those as soon as possible so that at least I know this firewall is not going to be compromised because of a bad default credential. And then admin activity logging, that sounds really good. So a redundant power supply module, yeah, I would definitely consider that, but I'd also be considering having the firewall on a UPS as well. So I'd definitely consider it, yes. But setting the firewall into monitor mode, I would definitely be doing that as part of the initial deployment, but I'm definitely going to be looking at doing options A and B first. They are more likely to be done first. And then same for D. I would probably do D, checking for updates before I do a setup where the firewall runs in a monitor mode. So these are all too damn good. So what should we do if we have a question like this where basically every answer is right? So let's see. Which of the following tasks should be done first? So let's try and prioritize. What would we do? What would I do? Well, between these two, those are my contenders for the first thing I would do. Then, that would probably be my third thing I would do, depending on whether A or B is my first or my second. The monitor mode, that would be the last thing I'm doing in this deployment option list. Let's see. Because that's third, I'm taking it out of the equation because I would do that last because I'd have done a whole load of other preliminary stuff before trying to get this firewall properly deployed. That leaves me with put the power supply in or change default credentials. I'm going with changing default credentials because a redundant power supply can be added at any time and it's not going to make a big difference. But if my firewall goes live with bad default credentials, even in monitor mode, that is dangerous. And it's something that's very, very easy to overlook because imagine you are deploying a firewall. You're thinking about the rules you need to configure. You're thinking about alerting and logging. You're thinking about all these cool advanced firewall things. And it's very easy to forget the fundamentals of good secure deployments, like changing credentials. So knowing myself, I would probably fall into that same trap. So I'd want to get that sorted out straight away so there's less chance of me forgetting that. Admittedly, I probably should have a checklist, but it does sound like the right option here. I would do A before anything else. And that was question 50. So that was 50 questions to help you get ready for CompTIA Security Plus. If you're here for LPI Security Essentials and you're good with these questions, you are more than ready for that exam. Now, hopefully this has helped you get an idea for what questions in the exam could look like, how the topics in the exam can be asked, and also some logic for handling these questions in the exam. I'd like to say thank you all for watching this, and if you have any friends, family members, or colleagues that would be interested in this, feel free to share it with them. And if you want to support the channel directly, my Patreon and crypto wallet addresses are below in the description. And lastly, good luck.